Hey everyone, it is February 20, 2014. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to talk about Facebook buying WhatsApp. We're going to talk about King's IPO. We're going to talk about the iPhone 6, and we're going to talk about, everything else that happened in Apple this week. This is the iMore Show. Joining me, as always, we have the managing editor of iMore.com, Mr. Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
I am delighted to be with you, Rene. After being away from you for a couple of days, I've missed you.
Yeah, you had, I don't know what that is, but something called real world things to take care of?
Yeah, exactly. Real world got in the way, and that pesky real world, there ought to be a law.
So you were just telling me that the Canadian women won some hockey thing, and apparently it's big enough that our chat room already knew this. I was the only one as the Canadian who did not know that.
You are such a bad South African Canadian. It's ridiculous. God.
I was telling you as far as I didn't realize until now that hockey was its own thing. I thought, like I said, that you start in figure skating. If you do really well, you get promoted to speed skating. Then they give you a stone and you get to curl. And if you're really, really good, they give you a stick and let you beat up people on the ice. That was my presumption.
So they give you a stick and let you beat up people on the ice. I guess the training for that would be when the newfies go seal hunting.
Ouch. I am not touching that with a 20-foot hockey stick, sir.
All right, now that we beat that one into the ground.
But I would love to see that event. If anyone can get into a fourcathlon for Winter Olympics, it would be marvelous. Just put everyone on skates through all the events.
Yeah, exactly. Especially the skiing events, I think would be more entertaining if they were on skates.
Yeah, brilliant. Let's do all of that. So as much as I would love to talk the Olympics with you all day, Peter, let's move on to Apple news. And it's not exactly Apple news, but the big news of the week is undoubtedly Facebook spending, I'm going to do this right, $4 billion in cash, $12 billion in stocks, and another $3 billion in I don't know what you call it, but incentives that will divest in 4 years for key founders and employees in order to buy WhatsApp, an instant messaging platform to go alongside Facebook Messenger, their existing instant messenger platform, and the maybe lamented Beluga, which they bought and killed years ago.
Yeah, indeed. And, maybe I am just completely out of the loop, Rene, but I have to admit my first question when I heard about this news was, what's WhatsApp? It was never on my radar. And maybe it's because I'm American, and maybe it's because this just, it kind of works like iMessage but doesn't. But I heard another plausible explanation today on the news, and that was WhatsApp is used extraordinarily by international users, people who are outside the little soap bubble that I live in. So, I guess it's a big deal.
So I knew of WhatsApp primarily because I knew a lot of people who were former BlackBerry users, and because BBM did not go cross-platform until far too late, they went in search of something that was very BBM-like but would work on, iPhones or Android phones or Windows phones or whatever, and a lot of them gravitated towards WhatsApp, and it became almost for a long time, actually, it was the BBM for everybody else. And I think we could break that down into a couple separate things, but I think that is where it started gaining momentum. And I think you're right. I think it also was very strong in areas where Facebook wasn't.
Okay. Yeah. That's entirely plausible. But the question is the valuation. I mean, WhatsApp is a pretty small company for the amount of money that Facebook has given them.
Dude, it is now a more valuable virtual currency than Bitcoin.
No kidding. It's terrifying.
It is. The valuations that come, for example, arguably BlackBerry, they could not get anyone to buy them for $5 billion. But if BBM was a standalone company, that might be worth several factors. Like it could be worth $10 billion all on its own. That's how insane our market is right now.
Yeah, exactly. So, hey, look, it was worth it to Facebook. That's the bottom line.
Now, I've used BlackBerry on and off. I think you've used BlackBerry in the past too. Do you think that this is a sign that BlackBerry absolutely flubbed it in the mobile instant messaging market by not being cross-platform sooner?
Oh, I think that killed them. I think that BlackBerry had an opportunity 3 or 4 years ago to make BBM the cross-platform instant messaging platform of choice, and they completely screwed the pooch.
Yeah, that's a little bit sad because, again, they couldn't be sold at that price. The thing that interests me a lot about this is not so much the individual acquisition, but what it tells us, what it continues to tell us about Mark Zuckerberg, because he's made a lot of acquisitions. Again, he bought Beluga previously. He bought Instagram for what was then considered, I think it was 1 or 2 or 3 billion, something like that, and that was considered a ton of money at the time. He bought Sofa. He bought Push Pop Press, which got him Mike Mattis, who made Facebook Home and now Facebook Paper. They've been investing heavily, and it occurs to me that they might be a very similar company to Apple. And that sounds ludicrous on the face of it, but what I mean is the best thing you can do is to not mistake your product for your business. And I think if we look at companies like BlackBerry and we look at companies like Microsoft, they've ridden their existing products into the ground because they were afraid of replacing them with new products that would protect their business. It would damage the short-term product, but it would protect their long-term business. And Apple was never like that. Apple started replacing the iPod with iPhones and then iPads, and now the iPods, are in the toilet. And maybe Apple helped hasten that demise, but they also have the new product everybody wants. They didn't surrender that to somebody else. Facebook doesn't make iPhones or iPads, but what they do is they demand attention. And I think Zuckerberg, with things like Instagram and WhatsApp, saw that these were rivals for his users' attention, and he would rather own them than compete with them.
Another thing comes to mind also, and that's that there's been some talk in the press lately about how Facebook is less and less appealing to younger users. That especially for kids who are in school, the implication is that Facebook is something that your mom and dad use, or maybe even grandma and grandpa might use. So it's not cool. The cachet of being on Facebook is not like it was 5 years ago. So the interesting thing for me about the WhatsApp acquisition, which $4 billion in cash and $12 billion in stock, I was just reading. So that's 4 Instagrams in cash, or 16 Instagrams plus the promise of another 3 billion if things work out well. Is Facebook growing its influence in different ways and trying to stay ahead of that curve, which I think is a very smart thing, a very smart business decision for Facebook to make, because you can't rest on your laurels. Not in this market, not in this day and age. You can never be content with what you've got, because that epitaph is BlackBerries.
So the interesting thing for me is for an iOS perspective, for iPhone users, Peter, I think Facebook and WhatsApp have both said that they will continue to operate WhatsApp as an independent company. It'll basically be autonomous from Facebook, much like Instagram is. Now, Instagram did get integrated with Facebook accounts, and it did cause some fallout with Twitter, amongst other things. But do you think anyone has anything to worry about if you are a current WhatsApp user?
No, I don't think so, at least not for the short term, because one of the things that Facebook said through this acquisition is that they're not looking to drive revenue through WhatsApp for the moment. So they're not looking to monetize their investment for the short term. But I emphasize, and I've said it a couple of times already, for the short term. As a WhatsApp user, I think that you would be crazy not to be somewhat concerned about how this is going to affect your user experience. But I don't think it's going to change anything today or tomorrow.
And they're famous for not monetizing their app. I mean, after the first year is free, then you pay $1 a year. After that, there's no in-app purchases. There's no sticker packs that you can buy. There's no large subscriptions. They're not a platform like Line or like WeChat, so there's no in-app purchase games that you can get to through this. It's a very clean user experience. But if people are concerned about the Facebook angle, there are alternatives, but it seems like increasingly those alternatives are all owned by similarly large companies. I mean, I guess if you hate Facebook, but for some reason your paranoia does not extend as far as Google, you could look at Google Hangouts, but Skype is owned by Microsoft. Apple has iMessage. BlackBerry still has BlackBerry Messenger. I was looking around, and one of the few alternatives I could find that wasn't owned by a big company was Kick Messenger, which has been around for a while, but it looks like increasingly, I think Microsoft even bought GroupMe a couple of years ago. So increasingly, that's becoming a big company business.
Yeah, and this is the sort of story of the age is that every time you find something cool, eventually that cool thing will be on the radar of a bigger company that will acquire it and make it less cool. So whatever.
To steal Harry McCracken's line, if you want to make a ton of money in mobile, your best bet is to create an app that scares Mark Zuckerberg into thinking people will look at that instead of Facebook.
Yeah, that seems to be working. Absolutely. I wish I could come up with that idea because I could use a billion or two.
It's also interesting how the core experience of mobile has really settled around a few tasks. Like the things that people are willing to pay money for or companies are willing to invest a lot in is the photography, it is the instant messaging, it is the communications channels. For all the games, for all the apps, I mean Candy Crush of course makes a ton of money, so there is interstitial gaming, but it really is those core experiences. Marcus Adelson, who runs Mobile Nations, earlier was saying that almost every one of the current big success stories he can still find on the home screen of his Visor smartphone.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that. I mean, and King is another one. King is planning an IPO. King is the maker of Candy Crush Saga, of course. Sega. But it's, yeah. I mean, what more need be said?
So. King of Cats is asking, doesn't that guarantee that the user base will be broken? I think there's no more or less broken than it already is. I mean, Ben Thompson tweeted a picture earlier. He puts all his instant messaging apps in one folder, so he gets a unified count of all the notifications waiting for him because he has to use, Line with his family, Google Hangouts with people who are at Google. Every one of his social groups uses a different app, and I think that's going to be more and more the case for all of us.
Yeah, and it's becoming a real pain in the butt to manage all of these social accounts. It becomes more and more time consuming. I really hope that we're heading towards an inflection point at some point or another where we finally have one app to rule them all, as it were. I really don't like having to go to Google Plus to talk there about whatever it is that I'm talking about, and go to Facebook and go to Twitter and so on. It becomes too much, and I understand that these companies are vying for my attention. I understand that they're trying to provide me with inherent value that makes me want to do it, but there are only so many hours in the day, and we're getting more and more harried as our social networking time gets more and more fractured with each different service. It's got to hit a breaking point sooner or later.
Well, I think one of the things is that IM never actually coagulated around a common standard protocol. Email, for all of its antiquated, anachronistic characteristics, is still email. And pretty much if you have a POP or an IMAP server, you can use Apple's Mail.app, you can use Outlook, you can use Actually, I don't know if you can use Outlook. That's a good question. But you can use a lot of different mail apps, and still your mail is just there. It's independent from the client. And I know Jabber tried to do that for instant messaging, but it just never caught on. But to me, I like proprietary interfaces because I think they produce the best user experience possible. But I like open protocols. I would like the idea that if I switched phones, my messages would change from being an iMessage to being on whatever other service they want. I like the idea that I could use any app and still keep all my contacts in one place.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, because ultimately the data is the important thing. The information that cloud that sort of surrounds us is what's important. And it's interesting because Marshall McLuhan's thing about the medium being the message is in some ways more true than ever, and in other ways less relevant than ever, as we figure out ways to keep ourselves in that cloud from device to device and from platform to platform.
Neil Douglas asked about Twitter in all of this, and it's interesting because Twitter kind of suppressed their direct messaging. They all but hid it on their website for a while, and now they've brought it back. Instagram has added direct photo messaging. It looked like direct messaging was becoming hot again, but I think that just has to do with the extreme heat around messaging in general, and I don't think services like Twitter really cater to the same need that instant messaging clients proper do.
That is correct. Yeah, I mean the instant messaging is still mainly. I mean, you can do some group communication, but it's still mainly a one-to-one protocol. Whereas something like Twitter is a one-to-many protocol. So yeah, I think that they fundamentally sort of scratch different itches.
Yeah, and the Twitter thing. I mean, they broke links inside of direct messages a while ago, and they haven't fixed that, so it becomes annoying. So I have more people using iMessage now than using Twitter just for that, and I think. As much as social networking evolved from instant message, I don't think they really understand instant messaging and the the hardcore instant messaging services are still the ones that people go to for that.
Yeah, absolutely, no question.
The other thing that's interesting is the regionalism of this, and you mentioned that earlier. For example, Facebook Messenger, extremely popular in some parts of the world, but Line, which is owned by the Korean company Naver, is incredibly popular in Japan. WeChat, hugely popular in China. It's owned by Tencent. They have had some censorship issues with it, but in general, almost so many people in China use it. It's almost unknown in North America. We saw a little bit of that with social networks like Orkut and things like that in the past. But I wonder if, because it's so intimate and so direct and so personal, IMs are always going to be subject to more fragmentation than other forms of social networks.
And that's exactly the fear that I was talking about a while ago. I just don't want to see this increasingly balkanized. I'd really like to see some sort of uniformity pop up, but I think that I'm probably barking up the wrong tree.
Have you tried that app secret.ly yet? Secretly?
I've been reading all about Secretly, but I have not tried it yet.
I loaded it up and it took a while to process, but then basically it was too much information about the people that I know, and it is anonymous, so I have no idea who it is. So I'm just appalled in a sort of a generalistic sense. But I don't know what need that app actually. I mean, it's salacious, it's voyeuristic, but I don't know what need that app actually caters to.
I've heard of people being offered jobs through Secret. I've heard of the salacious gossip end of things. I think people are still trying to figure out. It's like the three blind men and the elephant. One feels the trunk and figures it's a snake. One feels the tail and figures it's a rope, and then one feels the ear and thinks that it's a palm tree. I think that with any of these things, it's sort of what you make of it.
Yeah, and just to bring it full circle, what I thought was interesting about Secretly is a lot of people were wondering why news of the WhatsApp purchase didn't leak on Secretly first, and a couple of people saw that things are busy at the investment company that had invested in WhatsApp. And there were a couple of people talking about it, and it made sense in hindsight, but not enough. But I can see a lot of venture capitalists jumping on Secretly, just trying to see if they can ferret out information that will help them in their investments.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about Secret that people find so appealing is that it's the one thing the one problem that we have right now with social media is accountability for everything that we say, right? And we've seen this happen over and over again. Well, somebody might make an off-color joke on Twitter. They take off on an airplane, they land a few hours later, only to find out that not only have they been excommunicated from the human race, but they've lost their job and their house has been burnt down, and their cat has been given to a shelter someplace. Secret appeals, I think, because there's no accountability for what you're saying. So, it's an opportunity to get stuff off your chest or to share, potentially important intelligence with others without having it traced back to you directly. There's got to be some appeal for that there. And it's certainly, filling a niche that up until now really hasn't been addressed that well.
Yeah, my default state, because I am paranoid, is I never believe that stuff is going to ever remain truly anonymous. That's the same reason I've only ever used my real name online, because I never wanted to post anything that didn't have my name on it, because I felt like it was a way to protect me from posting something stupid that I might later regret.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I go by a pseudonym Flarg and have used it ever since I came online, but I make no secret of who I am for the same reason. I think it's a matter of personal accountability. But not everybody is equally comfortable with that, and that also is my basic concern with Secret, and probably why I haven't really been drawn to it so far. Because the bottom line is you connect to it through your phone, you register for it to use it. There is a footprint there for people to follow if they can figure out the secret sauce, as it were.
And that's one of the interesting things, because some people, their complaint about WhatsApp is that it's not secure enough. And I know, even though Apple says iMessage has end-to-end encryption on it, some people have asked about the security of that. And it's something that keeps plaguing the internet in general. Almost anything can be attacked, can be breached, can be compromised to some degree or another. And given the current state of thinking, given the NSA mentality, or whether it's Chinese hackers, whatever it is, I think we'll also start seeing a niche where people try to provide as high a security solution for messaging as possible. And we've seen some already, some which are more ephemeral, like Snapchat, which just disappears immediately. And I forget the name, but there's a business version of that where you can send secure communications to your coworkers that also disappear as soon as they've seen them.
And again, these things all fit niches that people unquestionably need. So good. I'm glad that developers are answering these needs for people.
So King of Cats is asking, does Facebook go after WeChat too? And that brings up a couple issues for me. One is Apple and Facebook are different in that Steve Jobs' fear of being obsoleted forced him to create products to obsolete himself. Apple didn't buy products. They sometimes did acqui-hires, or they bought key technologies, but they never bought another product that they thought was competing with the iPhone. Facebook isn't home-growing their own obsolescence. They're buying other companies. They're buying the Instagrams and the WhatsApps. And the problem with that is that it's an infinite problem. There will always be something coming up, and it's probably theoretically impossible to buy all of them. I mean, I don't know how many $19 billion checks Mark Zuckerberg can write, and that makes me want. Like, first of all, it's artificially inflating the value of all of these companies, making it more expensive to buy the next one. Because I bet Instagram feels like a bunch of jerks for only getting a couple $billion and not 19 billion. I'm sure Beluga feel like a bunch of idiots for going for chump change back in the day. So it's impossible to buy your way out of this. But also, not all these companies are for sale. WhatsApp, a lot of companies have bigger platforms, like Line is a platform, WeChat is a platform. WhatsApp didn't have the platform value of those companies, but it wasn't owned by anybody else, and that made it much easier to buy for Facebook.
Yeah, and here's the thing to remember about WeChat specifically. WeChat is owned by Tencent, which has a market value of about $100 billion. That is a much bigger fish than Facebook is. I don't see it happening. But the interesting thing about WeChat is that WeChat is a very, very different service than what we've talked about up until now, because it's a little bit of a kitchen sink thing. There's chatting, obviously, but there's also shopping, gaming. You can bank with WeChat and so on. So it's a much more diverse platform, I think, than what Facebook got with WhatsApp.
Absolutely. Socrolid is pointing out that WhatsApp does delete your messages from the server, and it's worth pointing out, they only ask for your phone number as a token ID. They don't ask you for demographic information. They don't ask you to share a lot of stuff about you, and as far as I know, they don't track any of that stuff either. So if you're worried about just giving over personal information, you don't have to worry about that with WeChat. With WhatsApp. So switching gears, Peter, we got an email, and I forget the name of the person who sent it, so I apologize. But we got an email asking again about the Mac Pro shipping dates. And I know we discussed this on Mac Break Weekly. So one of the theories going around is that they're not only constrained by the manufacturing having moved to the US and it being a whole new machine and a whole new process, but that the Intel chips, the Xeon chips, aren't in huge supply, and that maybe the graphics cards are constrained as well. And they were sort of wondering your take on this. Do you think Apple could be being held back just by the availability of the components?
Yeah, I think that Apple's definitely constrained in some way beyond just basic manufacturing stuff, because you would expect this to shorten, as opposed to increase. Having said that, manufacturing times for these things are still in the same ballpark that they have been. I recognize that there's been some variance here, but 6 to 8 weeks is pretty much what we've been looking at from the start, after Apple burned through its initial stock of whatever Mac Pros it had managed to manufacture. So I'm not freaking out about it yet. I don't necessarily think that they're running into huge constraint problems with suppliers or even with their manufacturer, although I think that their manufacturing is probably their biggest constraint, because it is a single factory right here in the U.S. There's only, I think, about 300 people that work for the company in total. And I mean, you compare that to the scale of things that they do with high precision, with Foxconn. Foxconn has 1 million workers on the payroll. It's nothing for them to say, oh, Apple needs more manufacturing, we'll get another 10,000 people in tonight. They will do that. They can do that. They've got that ability to deploy massive scale when they need to. We just don't have manufacturing facilities like that in the U.S. And you know what? I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that we don't, but it does mean that Apple has kind of put all of its eggs in this one basket for the Mac Pro, and we just have to be patient with it. In the interim, it certainly has the cachet of rarity.
Well, one of the other points that's been made about working in Shenzhen, which is the area of China that a lot of these factories are in, is that not just the scalability of the workforce, but the proximity of all the component makers. And I know Apple does manufacture some things like the Corning Gorilla Glasses in the U.S., and I believe the chipsets are being made in a Texas factory as well. But many of the parts, if you're having a problem, you could just walk to the next. Apple could send a guy to Shenzhen, walk between the factories, and solve that problem. Where the Mac Pro assembly sounds like it's a facility unto itself, and if AMD boards are coming in, if Intel boards are coming in, those aren't just next door for them to go and yell, "Hey, hurry up, guys, get that over here."
Right, exactly. And I also think that there may be some truth to parse constraints too, because I mean, outside of the Xeon chips that Apple is using, at least some of the stuff that they're doing is customized for this purpose specifically. So, it's entirely possible that AMD may be having yield issues, or that some other components may be in short supply. I have no idea, though. I don't know offhand whether or not that's true.
I know some people have been, almost second-guessing their orders because they're taking so long and thinking, can I make do with a Mac Mini, which I don't recommend because it's way past update date, or an iMac, which is an incredibly beefy machine now. I know Leo Laporte has said that, he's basically sitting there surfing the web on his, and he kind of feels bad about that. And Guy English famously is playing a lot of Arkham Asylum on his new Mac Pro. But I think that's worth considering, Peter. Do you actually need that specific large-scale hardware for what you're doing?
That's exactly, and that's a very good point. And you would think that somebody would make that decision before they plunk down their thousands and thousands of dollars.
No, shiny new.
But yeah, I think a lot of people just reactively want the best that they can possibly afford at that particular moment in time, figuring, hey, even if I'm not going to use it today, it'll scale for when I do need it. And you know what? I'm looking at it from the perspective of owning a 6-year-old now Mac Pro, and I have racked my brains for justification for buying a new Mac Pro, and I can't come up with one. And part of the reason why is because this machine is still rock solid.
Yeah.
And okay, I've done some tweaking. I put a new graphics card in. I've replaced the hard drive with an SSD, and I've done some other stuff to it as well. I've pumped up the RAM. But yeah, and thank you, Apple, for making a machine that I can actually do that in fairly easily. But it's after 6 years, it's still a solid machine, and part of my reason for not getting a new one is because I can't justify getting rid of this one yet, because it's still doing everything that I need to. And it wasn't a top of the line machine when I bought it, back in 08. It was a mid-range Mac Pro. So maybe there's something to that. Maybe you really do need to sit down and say, hey, look, can I get away with something that might not be as in high demand, just to get the box in front of me? Because God knows they're sweet. I've gotten my hands on them myself. We've got them in the store that I work in the weekends, and they are fun to play with. Ooh, even the quad cores are neat.
Yeah, in their chat room, they're discussing the price for the parts, and I'm going to go back to what I said when it was first announced. Asking if a Mac Pro will make your workflow better is like asking if a Lamborghini will make your commute better. You will darn well know that before they had a fun. That should not be a question for you. It's like asking the Stig. He'll know that Lamborghini will help. So if you know that you need dual Fire Pro graphics cards, if you know that you need a Xeon processor in 4, 6, or 8, then this is an incredible value for the money. But if you're thinking an iMac might be enough, then odds are an iMac might be enough.
That's precisely it. You've really got to take a look, and scratch the surface too, and look at iMac on its own may not be the right machine for some people, because maybe they don't want an integrated monitor. Maybe they don't want this, that, or the other thing. There are reasons why they may not want an iMac or a particular machine configuration, and only the Mac Pro will do. But I guess that answer and those decisions are going to be different for each different person.
Now, I still have no information on a new Mac Mini. I know people keep asking that. A lot of people are asking it because they don't need a Mac Pro, but they would love a new a new Mac Mini with the latest Intel processor. I
Sure.
forget its name now. I'm blanking on the name of the latest generation. Haswell processor with PCIe storage. With all the bells and whistles, and I think that would take might take some people's interest even more than a new Mac Pro. I just, it's still MIA as far as I know.
Right, exactly. And looking at Apple's track record for these things, there have been points in the past where Apple has had a very wide variance on refreshing the Mac Mini. They've gone 17, 18 months, I think, without refreshing the Mac Mini. The last Mac Mini came out, if I remember correctly, in October of 12. So we're well past the year mark now, and we're still waiting for one. My expectation is that we were going to get one sometime in the first quarter of this year, and I'm really hoping that it'll happen soon, because I would hate for March to come and go and still not get a new Mac Mini. And look, I also look at it, though, from the perspective of the commonality of parts and platform that the Mac Mini shares with the MacBook Pro. The MacBook Pro and the Mac Mini have always sort of been twins, right? The specs, if you take a look at the specs on the Mac Mini, they're almost identical to the standard 13-inch MacBook Pro. And the standard 13-inch MacBook Pro wasn't refreshed last year. It was refreshed last in 2012. That one's sort of the hanger-on right now. And my question has been, is Apple going to go, Retina MacBook Pro with the Mac Mini, or are they going to keep on with the current architecture of it? Because I think that needle is going to have to budge. Look, people love Mac Minis. They are a great entry-level system, a great entree into the Mac platform for people who have never used a Mac before, especially people who have desktop PCs and maybe don't want to go through the process of buying another display or getting another keyboard and mouse. They just want to unplug their old PC tower and plug in a new Mac Mini and see what using OS X is all about. They can do that very easily with the Mac Mini, and at a very low price too. I mean, $599 is a pretty good price for the amount of machine that you're getting with all that software loaded into it. No crapware, no adware, no bloatware, none of the stuff that you usually find out of commodity PCs. So the system also gets used in business quite frequently as an OS X server, for example. I mean, you could pick up an OS X server equipped Mac Mini with 2 internal hard drives for $1,000. It's a great deal, and it's something that gets used more and more, not just in small businesses, but also in medium-sized businesses and work groups, within enterprise configurations, because it comes fully equipped with web server software, podcast streaming software, email, the whole bag of works. You get everything out of that, and an unlimited user license, which makes it very appealing for people who don't want to be stuck in Microsoft's server hell when it comes to licensing. So I think that the Mac Mini, I have no doubt that the Mac Mini will continue far into the future, and this is, in my rambling way, the point that I'm trying to make. The question for me right now is, what is Apple going to do with it? Are they going to stick with this antiquated platform that, quite frankly, Apple doesn't, I think, see a lot of future in, or are they going to do something radically different with the Mac Mini? Now, I don't necessarily think that the Mac Mini, based on a Retina MacBook Pro, needs to look or even operate radically differently than it does now. They've kind of got the form factor down, and I don't really see a lot of change just for the sake of change. That's not Apple's mantra. But I do think that there might be a shift when they go to it. It's not just as easy, in other words, it's just plunking in a Haswell chip and saying, okay, same old Mac Mini. I think that they're going to do something different.
Yeah, that's my hope too. I'm hoping that come WWDC we'll see the next refresh of the Retina MacBook Pros, and along with that we'll see the Haswell Mac Mini with the PCIe solid-state storage options and all the other bells and whistles that the current generation MacBook Pros have enjoyed.
I hope that it comes before WWDC. I'd hate to wait that long to see what happens.
It just seems like a convenience product. What's the right word for this? It seems like a product that Apple updates when they have the time to do it, and when they're busy with other stuff, stuff, it's not quite as high on their priority list as the laptops are, as the iPads and iPhones are.
Nor should it be. It's an entry-level system, and it's there for a very specific reason, and it's there to hit a very specific market. As Sock Rowlett in our chat room says, well, let's face it, the Mac Mini isn't a real big moneymaker for Apple. It's accretive to their bottom line, but the Mac Mini doesn't sell. None of their desktop machines, though, sell in the same quantities as their laptops. When it comes to the Mac line, anyway, the laptops are the heat and the light. Everything else is just kind of ancillary.
The eye of Sauron is fixed upon them.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so transitioning to iPhone 6, we got this question emailed. If you have a question for us, you can always email it at any time to podcast@imore.com. And this is from Max, and he wants to know, do you think iPhone 6 will be capable of voice and data at the same time? All that I need is another antenna like Android phones have. The lack of simultaneous voice and data on iPhones on CDMA is probably what is holding many AT&T customers from switching to Verizon. So this is like, just to explain this properly, LTE does not do voice and data yet. We have to move to voice over LTE or VoLTE in order for that to become a reality. What happens on AT&T and other GSM phones is the data will drop down to HSPA or HSPA Plus in order to do simultaneous voice and data. The problem with Verizon is that they do not support voice and data on 3G either. No CDMA carrier does, because all of them are stuck on CDMA Rev A. None of them invested in CDMA Rev B. In order to work around this, some Android phones add basically a second antenna. One antenna does voice, one antenna does data. That's not Apple's priority. Apple's priority is power efficiency. They make these devices super, ultra, uber thin, which means that they have very small batteries, and those batteries would not be willing to support a second radio, which sounds like it's not much, but a second radio is twice as many radios. 200% the radio drain on the battery.
On the battery, yeah.
And for that reason, I don't know if you have a different take on this, Peter, but for that reason, I think that the same reason we don't have simultaneous voice and data or two radios on the iPhone 5 or the iPhone 5S will be the same reason we do not have it on any future iPhone going forward.
Well, and the thing is, VoLTE is coming, Verizon has said that it plans to have VoLTE out, I think, initially anyway. It's going to start experimenting with VoLTE in 2014, but it plans wide-scale deployment in 2015. So, the designers at Apple who are working on the iPhone have to ask themselves, are we going to compromise this thing with a second battery-draining radio and, the additional antenna work that we're going to have to do this to make this happen? Or do we just, it's a Mountain and Muhammad thing, which is going to move first? I don't see Apple compromising its design decisions on the iPhone because of what ultimately is a technical shortcoming for the carriers.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, and I think it's the same reason. Apple was not the first to 3G. They were not the first to LTE. Anyone who experienced the HTC Thunderbolt, the horrific experience of the HTC Thunderbolt, knows the reason for that is there was incredibly big, power-hungry chips. One of the theories for the advent of the large-screen phone is so they could actually put bigger batteries in to support LTE radios. Apple waited for, I think, the second generation, maybe even the third generation of LTE radios when they were more power efficient to include them, and they're going to wait for the voice-over LTE radios to include those as well, and for the same reason, the power efficiency. I think you're exactly right, Peter.
And sure, some analysts make the point that Apple is ignoring this at their peril, but the fact is CDMA is only one market for Apple, and it's a market that is in less worldwide use than GSM. So again, why would Apple go out of its way to cater to that significantly smaller market than, the billions of other people they could be selling phones to?
And they'll just wait for the smarmier advertisers among them to just put that little asterisk saying simultaneous voice and data when on Wi-Fi.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's another question on the iPhone 6, and this was, if Apple goes bigger, do you think that they will take the opportunity to put a larger battery in? And this is something we discussed previously, and it's interesting because nothing exists in a vacuum. So you make the phone bigger, you can absolutely afford to put a bigger battery in, but at the same time the screen gets bigger, and the screen is one of the biggest drains on a battery. Now, if Apple made the phone just bigger and didn't make it any thinner, then maybe the battery would be big enough that it would overcome the additional the additional drain from the larger screen size. But Apple historically has always gone thinner, I have a bunch of large size phones. Let me just grab some here. So here we have the Nexus 5. Here we have the Nokia Lumia 1020. Here we have the BlackBerry Z10. Yeah, Z10. And
Renee can say Z because BlackBerry is a Canadian company.
And they feel widely different. Like the Nokia phone is a brick, and I'm not being mean to it. Nokia puts up pictures on Twitter of broken sidewalks with Lumia 1020s on it, pretending like the 1020 broke the sidewalk. So you can have really hefty, really thick, really substantial large-sized phones, but that is just not Apple to me. The iPhone 5 was so light it felt like a carrier dummy, and I don't think Apple would be willing to make a brick iPhone even if it had a longer battery life.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2014. Where the hell is my Mr. Fusion? You know, I just want to be able to dump some banana peels in the back of my my iPhone and make it work for another couple of days. The problem, the inherent problem here is that the smartphone market and the development of smartphones is moving a lot faster than the development of batteries. And the lithium-ion battery makers are doing their best. Having said that, let's take the MacBook Air, for example. If you take a 13-inch MacBook Air, I mean, the 13-inch MacBook Air can last for 12 hours per charge. At least that's what Apple says. And, well, in fairness, it's pretty damn close. If you take a 13-inch MacBook Air apart, so much of the interior of that thing is taken up by battery. The computer is tiny.
iPad is the same thing.
It's a couple of sticks of gum in the back, but yeah, and the iPad is the same way. So I think that if Apple does come out with a larger phone, there is no question that they're going to use whatever space that they can get for battery. Partly because they're going to need it because of the screen, and partly because they're going to want to be able to say that it can last X hours. They're going to want to compete with everybody else. But Apple doesn't have a secret source for lithium-ion batteries. They're using the same ones that everybody else uses in their phones, and it's a technology that has not moved its needle quite as fast as the development of cool-ass gadgets like this.
It was funny. I referred to it on MacBreak as viral journalist stupidity over the weekend, and it was a replay of the Apple buying Tesla rumor because Apple's head of mergers and acquisitions had a meeting with Elon Musk of Tesla. Maybe Tim Cook did too. So the immediate thing is Apple's buying Tesla. It's like if I went to visit you in Boston. Renee's moving to Boston. No, I'm just visiting Peter. But what is interesting is there's a lot of synergies with those companies because Tesla is basically a battery research company that gets wrapped around cars for fun and giggles. And Tesla does not have the bank account of Apple, but they have a lot of common interests, and I could absolutely see. Tesla is rumored to be making a battery, and I think Seth Weintraub from 9 to 5 Mac mentioned this. I know Chris Miastowski mentioned this as well. They could be looking to do some sort of deal around these new battery factories because, like you said, lithium-ion is certainly nothing unique to Apple.
Yeah, I think that that's plausible, and I think it's interesting, and I was ready to rip what little hair I have on my head out at the Apple buys Tesla rumors. Just stupidest sort of rumor one could imagine.
Well, this is the thing we've talked, and I'll diverge for a second because I want to come back to the batteries, but we've talked about this before. I am sometimes very naive. I always believe that if you report on a company for long enough, you come to understand that company. But the more I read, and mainstream media has been really mean to blogs for a long time. They consider blogs like the really a stepchild, like really bad, amateurish, sloppy. But I think a lot of bloggers have deeper, better understanding of Apple than a lot of mainstream outlets based on the coverage, because Tesla is not. It's the same thing as Nest. There may be universes in which Peter and I are clowns made of candy, but in none of those universes does Nest or Tesla fit in the product matrix of an Apple-like company.
As long as I'm not made of candy corn.
That was my Big Bang riff. But getting back to batteries, so the lithium ion is one of the big constraints in technology right now, is that batteries are just not improving fast enough. And it's not just that the capacity of the batteries or the size of them are the problem, but the batteries keep in a ton of heat. The processors are limited to what they can do because the batteries keep so much of their heat on. If we could ever get graphene battery technology or just something to reduce the size and thickness of these batteries, we could also open up the processors and get a quantum leap forward in our phone technology.
And we will. We'll get there. But it's just coming in fits and starts, unfortunately. So, they do what they can, but they're limited.
Our chat room is just obsessed now with the idea of a heftier iPhone. Hefty, hefty, hefty.
Yeah, there's some. I don't know. There'd be some appeal to. Yeah, the 5S is a pretty light phone. I like the idea of having a little more weight in my hand. To be honest with you.
Well, sort of like the iPad Air. I mean, you pick it up and it doesn't feel like it. It feels way lighter than you would expect it to feel.
That's true. It's funny, in my weekend job at the store, I've had a couple of people pick it up going, wait a minute, is this a dummy? They think that they're holding like just a plastic model or something, and they don't realize that it's the real thing.
Michael Essie in our chat room is talking about Tesla sales, and when I was in Silicon Valley a couple months ago, I went around, and Apple is known to have an incredibly valuable store. Like their stores routinely outsell per square foot Tiffany's in places like New York, and the Silicon Valley stores do really, really well. But there was a Tesla mall in Santana, I think it's called Santana Row, and that was outselling the Apple store because as soon as it opened up, every nerd, because it's important to say these engineers, like the people who work at companies like Apple and Google and other companies of their type in the Valley, have much more money than they have time. They are paid well, but they are so busy they have very little to do with their money. So as soon as Tesla opens there, of course, every geek in the Valley is going to go and buy one because it's something they can spend their money on and have fun with.
Well, wasn't there a car dealership near there that actually sold a used Tesla in Bitcoin or something like that?
Probably. I would not be surprised.
They're on the bleeding edge out there, that's for sure.
So the last iPhone 6 question we got is, are there any updates on the rumors? And we're so far away that I don't think there's going to be a lot of substantive rumors yet. Apple has been sticking to their fall release schedule. The only thing I have heard is that there are not going to be 2 large screen iPhones this year. And I know some people have been reporting that there are. I believe there are multiple size prototypes, and in future years we might get multiple large sizes, but this year, at least from what I've heard, we'll be getting a 4-inch iPhone and a larger than 4-inch iPhone. I do not know exactly what yet, 4.3, 4.7, 5 inches, but as far as I know, there'll be a 4-inch iPhone and a 5-inch iPhone. Nor do I know if the 4-inch iPhone will be a 5SC or whatever that lower cost last year's model is, or if Apple's going to do what they did with the iPad line and have 2 new phones that are identical in everything but size. But that's all I know so far.
That's what I'm hoping for personally. That the only difference that is going to be in what size phone do I get, not what features do I want.
Well, I think if anything, the iPhone 5C has shown that while it is, I think, a very good, very interesting device, and Apple said this themselves, more people went iPhone 5S than they expected. More people were willing to pay the extra $100, $200, $300 to get all the latest specs and technology, and I think maybe Apple will take that into consideration going forward.
That seems reasonable. We'll see what happens though.
Because that's the thing, is that a lot of people analyze the phone market as if every buyer is the same, and every buyer is clearly not the same. I mean, people who gravitate to different products for different reasons. The same reason Phil Nicholson likes Android, because he can flash the ROM. There are some people who just like the iPhone because of what it offers, and it's sometimes not easy to just add an alternative, because people who want an alternative have an alternative product. What they want is more variety of the same.
Yeah, no, exactly. But Apple's got a gift for giving people not what they necessarily ask for, but what they need.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I'm going to turn that on you in an instant, Peter, because I'm going to go into a topic that you're not going to want to talk about this week, and that is the King IPO.
Oh, God.
And the reason I want to bring it up is because I was interviewed for Marketplace on American Public Radio about this, and they were asking me, what's the value of a King? And this is what I was thinking, but I don't have your expertise, so I'm curious on your point. I don't think there's any value in any hit game company because there's no hit game company that keeps producing hits. It's such a lottery. And sure, EA can go and buy game companies that have hits, but they're not making the next hit. They're buying the next hit company. So just because King has Candy Crush, I think we cannot read anything at all about their future hits based on their past ones.
Well, yeah, I mean, trying to predict future hits based on past ones is a road that is fraught with peril, especially in the game business, because we've seen case after case after case of companies that have, a few hits under their belts, and they try to make a big splash with something else, and then they disintegrate. But the bottom line is you have to be in it to win it. You have to play big in the game business in order to sort of sustain your momentum. Because if you're not, the big player, chances are you're going to get eaten either by a smaller competitor or by somebody else who comes along with more money than you. Take a look at Irrational Games. Irrational Games, great Boston-based, Cambridge actually based, Quincy, Mass based.
How dare you, Peter?
Right, indeed. Video game developer. These guys are the ones who made BioShock. Owned by Take-Two. Take-Two's shutting them down. 3 hit games. But that's the nature of the game business. If you're not the lead dog, the view never changes. So I can understand why King wants to be the lead dog.
So that's the interesting thing to me because there are like BioShock and the sequels. There are Arkham Asylum and the sequels, Battlefield and the sequels, Call of Duty and the sequels, Halo and the sequels. But that seems like a platform thing. I've not seen that in mobile. I mean, maybe some of the PopCap games like Plants vs. Zombies, but the biggest games always seem to change. It's Farmville.
Rovio.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough, but they're still mostly derivatives of Angry Birds, which, yeah, fair, same thing with Halo. That's fine. Maybe there'll be Candy Crush too. But whatever the next big game is always seems to come from a different company.
Well, sometimes yes and sometimes no. I think that the thing that King is counting on is having a valuation that's big enough that they will have a stockpile of money to sort of pick and choose the smaller companies that will be able to help them continue to ride that wave of success. And just the cautionary tale in the mobile market for all of that is Zynga. Because Zynga did that, and then they kind of lost the forest through the trees, spent an enormous amount of money on the guys who made Draw Something, lost it all, shut those guys down really fast. It just sort of saw their irrational exuberance sort of get the better of them over a course of about 18-24 months. Hopefully the same thing won't happen to King, but the game market is notoriously what's the word that I'm looking for?
Capricious?
Yeah, right. Volatile, actually. Volatile. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I mean that is absolutely the interesting thing for me. And what I think though is that some of these companies, I know there are some people who just want to make great games and they're not very happy with the current in-app purchase climate, but there are other people who just want to take customers for as much money as they can. And I think the strategy of these companies is to get a hit game, wait as long as possible, take as much value out of it as they can, and then pop an IPO so that they get a ton of investors and more money right before that tanks, and with no clear revenue for the future in sight. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know what to add to that.
You're I don't know. I think the mourning for what might have been.
Yeah, more than anything. I mean, but I'm not a big King fan to begin with. You and I have had many discussions away from the podcast about Candy Crush Saga, and my complete ambivalence for this particular product.
I loved it when it was Bejeweled.
But here's the thing, Supercell, they make this game called Heyday, which fundamentally isn't that different from Farmville. I can't stop playing the damn thing. I wrote my tip guide 6 weeks ago. Yep. I'm still playing the stupid thing. I can't delete it because I want to get to the next level. I want to get to the next thing. I want to start fishing. I want to start putting my stuff on boats. Our readers
love it too.
It just so I'm as as angry as I get with the state of the game market, I am completely complicit in this codependency. Oh, God, I hate myself.
I had to delete Threes from my phone because it was costing me sleep.
Oh, Threes is so awesome, though. How could you delete it?
I couldn't stop playing it.
Threes is my jam right before I go to bed. Nothing makes me happier than like 10 minutes of Threes before I zonk out.
I still get messages from Kevin Mitchell going, I got 53 at Flappy Bird. I'm like, put that away.
Wait, Mitchell really got 53 at Flappy Bird?
He says he's got the muscle memory down now.
Oh my God. What's your top number for Threes before you deleted it?
I saved my Game Center data just in case, but I think I got around 7,000 or 8,000.
Wow, that's pretty good, man. I can't break like 2 or 3. I think like my highest like single number on the board is like 192 or something like that.
Dieter Bone at Backlon somehow got 27,000 or something. I don't know. I figured he hacked the system.
Hacks!
So the last thing I wanted to mention was a while ago on one of the shows, I think it was Vector, Guy English and I were talking about Nintendo, and there's always rumors, and it's not rumors, it's just this deep desire from people who love both Apple and Nintendo to get Nintendo games onto iOS. And a lot of it makes no sense for reasons that people like John Syracuse have elaborated on sufficiently. But Guy's idea was a novel one, and I keep coming back to it. His idea was, people say that Nintendo's a hardware company, and fair enough, but our connection to hardware is mainly through controllers. And now that we have the Made for iPhone program, his idea was for Nintendo to offer like a Super NES controller and an N64 controller, and those to be prerequisite for the downloading of not terribly expensive games, maybe $5, maybe $10 games, but you'd be playing them with that controller either on an iPad or over AirPlay on Apple TV, or maybe in a theoretical Apple TV game store. And I'm wondering if that could be, I don't know if the ultimate in compromise or better than the sum of the parts, because you'd still have that Nintendo hardware feel. You wouldn't be sacrificing the controls to the touchscreen, but you'd also have a massive installed platform base with more advanced technology than they're currently providing.
I guess. I don't know. It seems like a long line for a short ride. Is it really that much better an experience doing that than just playing it on your 3DS or, whatever? I don't know. I'm kind of left cold by the idea.
Peter, I would play a Super NES game on a refrigerator if they offered it to me.
All right, yeah, fair enough. I know that a lot of people pine for Nintendo games, and especially Nintendo's first-party stuff, to be on the iPhone and the iPad, and I get why. I really do. I understand it. But the problem that I've got with it is that Nintendo, despite the mistakes that they've made in the home console market, the Wii U and to a certain degree, even Wii, they haven't capitalized on it like the way that they could have. They get mobile gaming, I think, better than most people do. And the interesting thing for me about like the 3DS, for example, is okay, a lot of kids play 3DS. I mean, my 3 kids all have 3DSs. But it's funny how many adults I find, with a 3DS in their pocket too. And it is a hardware experience that is thoroughly optimized to provide you with that Nintendo gaming experience, and it is sort of optimal for it. And in that respect, it's a very Apple-like experience. And I've drawn the parallels between Nintendo and Apple for years because I think that they get hardware in a way that maybe Sony and even Microsoft don't when it comes to, well, certainly when it comes to the mobile experience. The PS Vita, for example, as powerful a system as that is, I don't think that you can compare it to a 3DS and not come away with a favorable perspective on it.
It's not as human.
It's not as much of a human experience. It's exactly right. So given that experience is so closely tied to the hardware, I'm not really sure that people would be that satisfied with being able to play Super Mario Brothers on a phone or on an iPad with some other gadget attached to it to kind of pull you into that experience. It's still not quite the Nintendo experience that you want.
All right, so people, if you're listening to this, let me know because I think there might be something to the idea, but I think Peter has very valid points. So if you're listening, write in, leave a comment, let us know. The chat room is still talking about a larger screened iPhone. I think this is going to happen for months. The question that's coming up, or the topic that's coming up most often, is whether Apple would have to go to, or would want to go to AMOLED or OLED or SAMOLED or some screen technology like that to either improve battery life or to increase thinness. Apple historically, Tim Cook directly has said several times that they're not happy with OLED technologies, and OLED has been plagued with saturation issues, with the longevity of the blue color element issues. For larger screen devices, Samsung famously went with pentile displays for a while, which is considered suboptimal by many people. And what I mean by pentile is most LCD displays, like the displays on Apple has right now, are red, green, blue. That's one for each color. Pentile had 5. They repeated 2 of the colors twice, and it was in a different pattern. And frankly, I don't think it's as good. And I don't think Apple would. And Apple, I think Tim Cook said this really recently, like a couple weeks ago too. Apple will not sacrifice the quality of the display just to make it bigger. So I think if we do see a bigger iPhone this year, and I think we will see a bigger iPhone this year, at least my take, Peter, is that it will have as good a display as we are used to from Apple, and I don't think OLED is there yet.
Yeah, the display is an area that Apple is not willing to compromise on, period.
Yeah, our eyes, they care deeply about the experience of our retinas.
They do.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you were here live, we really appreciate it. It is the best way to enjoy the iMore show. You can find us live every Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time at imore.com. A quick note about our video feed, because people are still writing in and asking us about it. We had a ton of complaints about the host that we were using, and we didn't like the quality we were getting either, so we're busy looking for a new host. We're testing out 2 different hosts right now, and we're going to make a decision soon, move everything over, and then the show will keep updating on the video feeds. And we have kept all the past shows, so they'll all show up there again. In the meantime, there's still the audio feed. There's still the YouTube channel at youtube.com/iMoreVideo. I know that's not as convenient for some of you, and I do apologize. And again, it will be available soon, but if you really want to watch us instead of listening to us, that is your best bet. If you want to send us in a question, we love discussing things with you. We consider this a community show. You can reach us at any time at podcast@imore.com, or on Twitter, just put #AskIMore, or just leave a comment on this podcast, and we'll pick it up and address it next week. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. Where can we find you on the socials?
At Flarg, Flargh on Twitter, and well, pretty much anywhere else, and of course on iMore.
And you can find me at Rene Ritchie on all the social things. You can find us at iMore. Chat room, Sockrolid, Neil, Mike, Sparkling Cyanide King, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. You make the show ever so much more pleasurable, and we'll see you guys. We'll see you guys next week, where Peter and I will be sitting comfortably in our homes while almost everyone else at Mobile Nations runs around like chickens without their heads at Mobile World Congress.
Yay!
Yay! Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to record the intro again, just the beginning part of it, because we covered a couple of things I didn't mention, because I didn't do a great job. So if you give me 1 second, I'll just knock that out.
And you didn't let me talk about HyperCard.
Oh, do you want to talk about HyperCard?
No.
All right.
That's fine.
All right, let's do this quickly.